Right, I've been there, your graphics card isn't booting up or there's some other weird issue going on. Just wait, there might still be hope. I'm going to cut right through the waffle and actually show you the solution right now. So here is the solution. So you might ask yourself, what on earth is that? And that's the X clamp. And that's a clamp that pushes on the back of the GPU chip just to make all of the pins again. And they actually had the same thing on the Xbox 360s and the Xbox Ones that came out of the factory because they had an inherent GPU issue. And I also got this idea from this guy up here. If you wanted to apply this solution to your own graphics card, I would just recommend measuring up the distances between these screws for yourselves. This is specific to the AMD RX 580. Just to clarify, because I'm really bad at explaining, this clamp is designed for this graphics card as shown in the video, but the X clamp will work on any graphics card as long as it's designed correctly and it fits. A lot of the legacy GPUs actually experience this problem, and you'll also find this in laptop GPUs because of overheating. But what I'm trying to say is this issue isn't specific to AMD or NVIDIA. Whilst they are getting better, it doesn't mean that this doesn't happen. I've included the STL files in the description below, but I recommend to 3D print your own design. That way you can get it right yourself. So if you do choose to 3D print this solution yourself, bear in mind the choice of material. So I didn't print this out of PLA, and that's because PLA softens around 60 degrees. And that will mean that we'll lose some of this mechanical integrity and we'll lose some of this force that presses onto the back of the GPU chip. So instead I chose to 3D print this out of PETG. PETG can withstand up to 80 degrees before it starts to soften, so that's much more applicable to this application. You could also just skip all the nonsense and just go on the internet, eBay, Amazon, and buy yourself a metal X clamp. Just make sure that the dimensions fit your own graphics card. They only cost around £5, so it's pretty much a bargain. I only chose to 3D print because I had a 3D printer handy. This is a spare X clamp that I had, so if I were to apply this, I'd apply this extruded face down onto the back of the GPU chip, and I'd also place a bit of double-sided sticky tape. Any rubber heat pad would do, just to give me a bit more pressing force down on the back of the GPU chip, on the center of the GPU chip. So these screws actually came with the graphics card originally. They hold the heatsink and the two fans. So I took the tension springs off them because they wouldn't work otherwise. And I made sure when I would tighten this down not to tighten up too much, because over tightening of these screws might lead to the BGA balls cracking off. So what I just said is BGA, and you might already know this. That stands for ball grid array, and they are balls that sit on the underside of the GPU chip, and they connect the GPU onto the PCB of the graphics card. Now what happens is, with strenuous use, with constant cyclical heating cycles, and with a heat sink and two heat fans that weigh down on the board, we get a resultant force upwards on the GPU chip that actually cracks some of the BGA balls off the PCB. And let me demonstrate what that actually would look like. So imagine that we had this GPU chip in the center of this piece of paper, and we had 4 pins on each corner. So as we press down on each of the 4 corners, we actually get a resultant force upwards on our GPU chip, and that would cause the corners of the GPU chip to crack, and the connection would not be made. And this actually accounts for a lot of the issue you might be experiencing At least it did for me. So having learned that this was actually a BGA issue, I asked my friend who'd worked in electronic repairs for 3 years, and he told me that at his place they had a BGA reflow station and that it only had a 50% success rate, and the other 50% was certain death for the graphics card, because most of the time this is a do or die moment for the graphics card. And this graphics card only costing around £100. I thought it's not really worth it to get it repaired. I've seen people online doing BGA reflow stations, and to those people I really respect them, because I could never build something like that. And I've actually seen people put their graphics card into the oven just to get this to work again, and it's surprising to see how many of those graphics cards actually come back out alive again. All I'm saying is, trying this might just save your graphics card temporarily. At least it did for me. Right, just some things before I actually applied this fix. You probably tried this already, but if you haven't, they are well worth trying. So, first things first, identify your GPU is the issue. Now, I just asked my friend for a motherboard just so I could rule out the PCIe Express slot. Sometimes this thing just gets mucky inside, so I recommend just blowing it out if that's the issue. Also, it could have been the power supply. So I just grabbed a spare power supply in combination with this motherboard, but nothing worked for me, but it might just work for you. But any steps that you take here are going to help narrow down the problem that you're having. Once you've narrowed it to the GPU, go ahead and give that sucker a good deep clean. There's a good video on this right here on how to do it properly. You don't want to damage anything in the process, so just follow the steps in the video. Just to clean off any dust, blast, if you've got an air gun, blast out any dust from the fans. Make sure not to damage the fans in the process or any of the components. It can easily be done. I also applied my thermal paste, or should I say I reapplied my thermal paste, just to rule out overheating, because dust, old thermal paste, crappy thermal pads are gonna cause your GPU to overheat, which could be the issue. So after trying this, it still didn't work, so I went on. Also, look at obvious things like any burnt patches, discoloration, anything that stands out that's obvious. If not, as it did for me, I watched a very, very good video that talked you through checking resistances, operating voltages when it was powered on, using a multimeter. So the link to that video is up here. I recommend you follow that through. For the sake of 10 minutes, it's going to step you closer, and you could even use an octo tester just to help you solve the issue. You can tell that your GPU is failing by running a quick stress test on your GPU, and it might give back some results that you're not happy with, but it's better for you to see the issue beginning to form than the GPU dying on you mid-game. In terms of software for testing the GPU, you can actually make yourself a bootable USB, and this will have a memory program on it, which basically determines your GPU RAM, if that is faulty, if that is in a good state. So I actually followed the video by Learn Electronics Repair. This guy is amazing. And I booted into Arch Linux onto this, which had a Python script called memtest, and that resulted in a list of virtual RAM errors. So the virtual RAM chips were faulty, and it was at that point that I suspected that something hardware related was the issue. I'm gonna be frank here and say that that test pointed me in the right direction and got me a lot further to where I wanted to where I wanted to be in terms of finding the fix. So I recommend you give that a try as well. Just to let you know guys, for all the things I have mentioned here, I have put links in the description below to all the relevant links that you need, files, etc. If you are really determined to solve your graphics card issue, I believe watching a few videos on YouTube, reading a few forums will get you much closer to solving that graphics card issue. If not, you might have learned enough to say, I'm just going to simply buy a new graphics card, and that's fine. There's no judgment there. I would do the same if I weren't so stupid. Anyhow, I hope something from this video works for you. Let me know if you had any success in the comments below, and until next time, best of luck guys.